This here is a 2011 Volkswagen Eos with a 2-liter TSI engine, probably the CCT letter code if I remember correctly. This may have been the subject of a previous video. If so, I'll put it up in the cards right up in that area right. First of all, we've done a bunch of repairs on this car. And the customer called me the other day and they said it's acting up again. Last time it was here, it was misfiring. We found one of the coils unplugged. We plugged that coil back in and it no longer misfired. So at that point we recommended changing the coil connectors to keep them plugged in because they were all broken. And it's been fine ever since for about 3 weeks, and now he calls me up saying it's misfiring again. He was fearful of what we might charge. He took it to his father-in-law's cousin's brother, uncle, something like that, and they did a code check procedure on it, and they found a trouble code, and at that point said it needed an oxygen sensor. So he called me to price an oxygen sensor install. I told him if I don't diagnose it, I put the oxygen sensor on and you take it whether it fixes it or not. He was okay with that, and today he shows up with an oxygen sensor for me to install. Of course, we get it apart and the oxygen sensor's wrong. Here's the original oxygen sensor we took off the car, and here's the new oxygen sensor. And if you notice, the connectors are nowhere near the same. Now, a lot of times Bosch oxygen sensors will come with a second connector in it, and this did come with a second connector in it that you could change over, but it's nowhere near right either. So unfortunately, the customer doesn't have any transportation in order to come up and get this oxygen sensor, in order to get the right oxygen sensor to bring it up so that I can install it for him and he can take the car and I can, earn my pay for doing what I was asked to do and go about my business. But unfortunately, I've already removed his oxygen sensor, and now if I have to put it back on, I have to charge him for what we've done. So the customer did agree to leave the car so that I can get the right oxygen sensor, but then he told me why he was replacing the oxygen sensor, that there was a P2187 system lean at idle bank 1 trouble code. Also, there's a P0299 turbo underboost trouble code. Now I can tell you right now, the oxygen sensor ain't going to fix the turbo underboost trouble code, and the system lean at idle probably doesn't need an oxygen sensor either. It's probably just running lean. So now I'm forced to reinstall his original oxygen sensor. Of course, I'm charging for that. And to actually diagnose the car, of course I'm charging for that, to find out what the true fix is. The trouble code that he gave me is P2187 system lean at idle bank 1, and also P0299 turbo underboost. I made a video on P0299 underboost right there on this type of engine, so you can watch that if you want. But the lean at idle, he also told me that there was a squealing noise, and I heard the noises, but he wasn't paying me to diagnose the problem. He was paying me to put on an oxygen sensor. Now at this point he is paying me to diagnose the car. And remember this, folks, when you try and diagnose your own car, you can't just scan it and see a lean code and think it needs an oxygen sensor. So let's get the oxygen sensor reinstalled so that we can actually diagnose the car. These are the tools I use to get this out. This good old-fashioned Harbor Freight oxygen sensor socket, and 3-inch extension and a 1-inch extension. Don't need a flex head snap-on ratchet, but that's what I used. And as I took it apart, he had just driven it here and it was scalding me to death, but going back together should be a little bit easier. Yeah, it's a lot easier when it's not scalding me to death. Okay, I've put this tube back in order to start the diagnostic process. Okay, I'm not hearing the noise right now. I was hearing it when I pulled this car in, but the car was warmed up. The customer drove it here. So we'll let it run for a little while we scan it, and hopefully you can hear the noise. Still no noise happening, but I do have VACCOM up with the trouble codes. Now, we had this trouble code here once before when the vehicle was here for a misfire, and we simply plugged in the coil for the number 1 because it was not plugged in all the way, and because the connector was broken. And we left it plugged in for them. They drove it for 2 weeks. The problem didn't happen. So then we put coil connectors on it. And if you can see, all our coil connectors are good. We replaced them all because they were all broken. So I really think there's no way this car got out of here without us clearing this code. But it's certainly possible. But that's the code we have there. You can't see there's 12 codes there. I don't know how many the customer triggered by tinkering with it himself. But here's the second code, random misfire. Third code, cylinder 1 misfire, cylinder disabling, and cylinder 2 misfire. Intake manifold flat position sensor. In my experience, almost every time that means this thing needs an intake. 2015, P2015. And then this is the code the customer must have saw, P2187, system to lean at idle. And then P0299, control range not reach. Once again, I got a video on that, look up in the cards. And idle control system higher than expected, that usually means there's a vacuum leak of some type. Cold start idle control system, P0507. Once again, that's usually a vacuum leak. Cylinder 4 misfire. Cylinder 3 misfire. Anyway. So let's look and see whether the oxygen sensor would have helped this guy at all. We're going to look at 32 and 33. And you can see there that oxygen sensor is moving around. You may not be able to hear it. Let's move over there. But the reason it was rich is because the purge valve was active. You can probably still hear it clicking. Maybe not, it stopped. But it was clicking just a moment ago, and that's why it was rich. And now, as you can see, the fuel trims which that comes almost directly from the front oxygen sensor, is pretty normal. So it's just a little bit positive, but it is going into the negative. So an oxygen sensor that goes into the negative and into the positive and kind of averages 0 is a working oxygen sensor. Now, the fact that the adaptation at idle is 6.5, that's a little high, and that's why the code is triggered, because it's running lean. Not because it's got a bad O2, it's running lean. So the automatic assumption when you have a lean code is that you have some type of vacuum leak, and the first check when you do that is to spray some brake clean or carburetor cleaner around the intake and stuff, to any hoses, to see, look for vacuum leaks and see if it affects fuel trim, or do a smoke check. I think I'm going to spray around on this a little bit. Let's see what happens. As you can see there, it went way into the negative, negative 15. See if I can do that again. Let me let it balance out. Oh, hang on, the purge valve seemed to have went active again. Yeah, purge valve's definitely active. So I don't know whether I sprayed it and it went rich, or whether the purge valve going active made it rich. Well, the reading went into the positive, so I'm going to give it a good dousing with spray again. And it went into the negative. So pretty clearly we have a vacuum leak of some sort. Oh, and you might have just noticed the noise just started. Of course, I can't know how well that's coming across on camera, but it's pretty blatantly obvious. Something's sucking. Kind of a good check on these is to try and remove the oil cap, and if the oil cap's stuck on, then you have a huge vacuum diaphragm leak, putting too much vacuum into the crankcase. And see there, I'm trying to pull that up, and it is not coming up. I can yank it out of there, but there's a lot of vacuum on there because I can't pull it up easily. Now, this hose over here is where the vacuum comes from the intake manifold into the crankcase, or into the crankcase vent valve. I like to plug that off, and if the noise goes away when I plug that off, then we can kind of tell that that the hissing noise is from the crankcase having too much vacuum in it. I've been working my way around this with the scribe, trying to get this off without breaking it, and I finally got it off. And here is the diaphragm, and you can see this is cracked. I'm trying to get it to where the white car is behind it, and you can see it see the white car through those cracks. So obviously that's our problem. I really think this Dorman made in China diaphragm is not good enough material to last in this environment. Just wanted to show a little bit better with the light behind it the cracks in this diaphragm, and you can see there's one, they're all over this thing. And since this is a dormant part, it's been replaced at some point. I looked through our history and I don't think we installed it, although we have installed some of these dormant ones. But obviously it's been replaced at some point and it didn't last very long. Obviously that's not good. But for the cost of it versus the new one, which is 4 times as much, maybe it'd be worth putting one in every year. Anyway, we'll take some more video once we get the new part. Kind of looks like we need to unplug these coils in order to change this crank vent valve. Guess I need to point out that Volkswagen calls this an oil separator. I don't think that was supposed to happen. Here's the new part with the part number. It's expensive booger from Volkswagen, that's for sure. I like to get these all started first. That way you're not risking cross-threading them. And then tighten them all down once they're all started. Oh, there was one thing I wanted to say. You can't use this technique of plugging the intake and then assuming that's your problem. If this is perfectly good, you could have a bad rear main seal or another leak, another crankcase leak causing this car to run lean. So the only reason I didn't do any further checks is because it was so bad, and I'd happen to know we put a rear main in this car not even a year ago. So maybe at the point where we put the rear main in, we should have put this on there also. I have been doing that as a process test, but I didn't obviously do it on this car. Okay, I got this coil put back together. Well, after some huge interruptions, I'm back at it. I better remember to put these clamps back on. That could be a problem. These are all wore out. Let's start it up, see if it makes a whistling noise. No hissing noise, of course, but it took a while for the hissing noise to start on me when I was diagnosing it. We'll get a computer up and running and get some fuel trims here. Short-term fuel trim doesn't seem to be active yet because the front O2 hasn't warmed up. Go race the engine a little bit, see if it warms it up faster. Usually modern oxygen sensors heat up pretty fast because the heater, they have an electric heater in them. Oh, there it goes. And so if it's fixed, I would expect it to be negative right now because it has to counteract for the 2.4%. By the way, Volkswagens are not linear. You'd think on some cars that this would be 2.4%, it would compensate for that, but it takes a lot higher short term to compensate for the long term. Of course, at some point the purge valve is going to go active because that's what they do after you start them up and let them run for a while. Now I always watch this before I clear the code because once you clear the code it reverts fuel trims to 0, and I kind of want to see this correct the short term. Sometimes it takes some driving to do so. We'll go drive it, listen for the whistling noise, and watch the fuel trims while we drive it. And of course you can, I don't know if you can hear that or not, but the purge valve just went active. Okay, as we were test driving, it got to the point where the fuel trim seems to be working, so I cleared the trouble code. And a short time after clearing the trouble code, the oxygen sensor stopped working. You can kind of see it is working right there, but the fuel trim is showing nothing. And that usually happens because there's some sort of trouble code. And so, of course, I went to check trouble codes, and these codes have reoccurred. Ignition control module circuit for cylinder 1. Of course, that code was in there before, but we were ignoring it. and random misfire, cylinder 1 misfire, and cylinder disabling. So I'm pretty sure that either the number 1 coil has failed or the number 1 coil isn't plugged in good enough. Let's go out and take a look. Seems to be plugged in good. Let's just swap it out real quick and see if it changes our trouble code. You can kind of see it's shaking a little bit there. Maybe you can't see it on camera, but it is shaking. It is misfiring. That number 1 cylinder probably not firing. I don't know what kind of crap aftermarket coil this is, but this one pulled apart too. I don't know if you've seen the number 3 pulled apart like that. I'm looking at this thing and it has no brand identifier on it whatsoever. Okay, doesn't seem to be shaking and misfiring as much. Let's go clear the code and drive it again, see if it reoccurs. Clearing the codes. Go back in, make sure it don't reoccur immediately, because on the test drive it did reoccur very quickly. I'm not saying immediately, but very quickly. And we'll go into 32 and 33, make sure our fuel trims are working. And fuel trims at 7. That's a little high. 10. We'll go drive it. Okay, we're back from our test drive. And you can see there the adaptation at idle has adapted to -0.2, and fuel trims on the and our short-term fuel trim there in group 33 field 1 is under control, and I've been watching it and it's been going negative sometimes and positive other times. Didn't quite go into the negative that time. And there it went into the negative. And so that's a good working fuel system in control, going negative and positive. I really think this car's fixed. Let's check codes. And no code. So obviously this car had a lean condition with regards to the crankcase vent valve, and also had a coil failure. Probably should have addressed that with the initial codes, but I can call the customer and get their okay for another coil. Although I'm very worried about that other coil because it separated also. Most likely these are cheap coils that they've bought from someplace, but they're needing their car back today, and we'll get it back to them. The lighting in here is terrible, but I don't care. I got to get some stuff done. If you learned anything in this video, be sure and click the like button. If you like this video or it helped you fix your car and you want to donate to the continued production of these videos, visit my website at www.kansascitytdi.com and find the donate icon. And if you want to watch some more of my videos, click right there, or you can watch that one right there. And don't forget to click the subscribe button. It really helps.